The Bible says God is good and that He's able to do miracles. But what do you do when you pray in faith and He doesn't come through? In this week's talk, we'll show you how to respond when faith checks bounce.
What do you do when you write a faith check and it bounces? When you take that promise and God, I need your help. I know that you're with me. When you take that to the bank and they say, I'm sorry, man, we can't cash that. How do you move forward as a Christian when that happens? When you're waiting for the biopsy to come back and you say, God, please, please, please. And you're praying and you're rebuking cancer in the name of Jesus. And the biopsy comes back and they say, it's cancer and it's everywhere. How do you move forward? When you pray God's protection over your daughter every time she drives, and one of those times she's driving somebody who had way too many drinks is also on the road. She's in a coma and they say she may wake up and she may not. You need to start talking about unplugging. And you say, wait a minute, I prayed God to protect her. What happened? What do you do when you're right on the verge of losing your business or your home or your leg or your spouse? And you say, God, you've got to do something. You've got to step in. I know you're here. I know you love me. I know you can. God, help. And you pray fervently and your friends pray fervently and you still lose the business or the house or the leg or the spouse. How do you move forward when that happens? We've been in a series talking about borrowed promises, things that God never meant to be taken to the bank as a promise that can lead us to become disillusioned. But today I want to talk about not how to avoid disillusionment, but how to move forward when you've already hit that. When disillusionment has smacked you in the face, how do you move forward? That's what we're going to focus on today, because I think for some of you, you've been in that spot. Maybe you're presently in that spot. Maybe somebody that you love has turned and walked away from God because they could not reconcile a God who can help and didn't help. I want to talk about that today. So there are several different approaches that people take when they get there. And let me just take a minute real quick before we talk about how to respond. Let me just take a minute. I meant to do this earlier. I said this before, but just in case, if you got little ones in the room, some of the content we're going to talk about today is going to be pretty graphic and real. Viewer discretion is advised. I always remember as a young person, I used to watch 24 on TV. I don't know any Jack Bauer fans. That's old. But they would have viewer discretion is advised. I'm like, man, this is going to be good. Yeah. It's not really good for a pastor, but that's okay. That's today. What do you do though? What do you do when you're left there holding the check? I'm sorry, I can't cash this. There are several different approaches that people tend to take, and it's all to try to simplify this complicated thing. How can God be able to help me and also good and also choose not to help the way that I asked? One of those approaches that people take is to say, well, and you can write this down, some say, well, clearly God's just not in the miracle business anymore. That's why. He didn't help because he did that in the Bible. That was for the original disciples that were around him. They were the ones who could do this stuff. He's clearly not in that business anymore, so we shouldn't ask. God just does spiritual stuff, and one day we'll be in heaven and it'll be okay, but in the meantime, we're on our own. And there are Christians in our country that's their approach when they've been left holding the check. Now, the problem with that idea is that if that were true, he sure didn't say anything about it in the Bible, because when you read the Bible and Jesus said, these signs will follow those who believe. They'll lay hands on sick and they'll be healed. He doesn't give an expiration date for that. When James says, is any of you sick? Call the elders around them, anoint their head with oil, pray for them, confess your sin to one another, and you'll be healed. He doesn't say in the first 100 years. And let me double down on this, all right? Deanna, is God still in the healing business? Yes. Some of you, like me, have seen it happen in my lifetime. So I know conclusively that saying, well, God just doesn't do miracles anymore, that's not the answer. Because clearly he still can, and he still does. That's not the answer. Sometimes, write this down, some say, well, you just didn't have enough faith to secure a yes. The check didn't work because you didn't put enough faith on top of it to get it. And as someone who grew up in Pentecostal churches as a kid, this was never preached from the pulpit, but it was kind of preached from the pews. If you prayed, and you didn't get healed, if you prayed, and the son didn't come back to faith, if you prayed, and the wife still left, the reason that God said no is because you didn't pray hard enough. You didn't have faith hard enough. You didn't believe firmly enough. And maybe you grew up in a tradition like that. But if that's the case, if that's the reason, then let me ask, did Jesus lack faith? Because when Jesus was in the garden right before he gets arrested, and he's desperately praying, God, please make a way for me not to have to walk through this. If there's any other way, God, please don't make me do this. And God said, no, son. Was that because he didn't have enough faith? Paul in 2 Corinthians, Paul said, I've been given some thorn in my flesh. We don't know what kind of ailment it was. But he said, 3 different times I pleaded with God to take it away, and all 3 times God said to me, no. Do you really think Paul the apostle didn't have enough faith to get healed? He had enough faith to heal other people? I know that faith matters. I know that plenty of times in the Bible, Jesus said, your faith has made you whole. But Jesus also said, if you have even the tiniest mustard grain of faith, that's enough. I don't think that's the reason. And then a group would say, okay, well, when you don't get the answer, when God doesn't come through, when the miracle doesn't happen, they'll say, well, God sent heartbreak. You write this down. Some say God sent heartbreak to teach you a lesson. God gave your mom cancer because he wanted to toughen you up. God caused the industry to shift and them to outsource those materials and you to get laid off, and now you can't even find a job pushing grocery carts to teach you a lesson. Maybe. But if that's the case, if heartbreak is God's way of teaching lessons, then what about 102, did you realize this? 132,000 children in Gaza starving. What lesson is God teaching them? Did you know every year 250,000 people in Indonesia die from cancer? And 90% of them do not know the Lord when they enter eternity. What lesson is he teaching them? Is God sending cancer to 250,000 people every year to toughen them up? Or is that part of the curse of sin when we unplugged from God and said, we'll be humans without you? Now, are there times when God sends hardship into your life in a season to teach you a lesson? Absolutely, there can be. But I firmly believe that is not the answer to every time you're left with a faith check that bounces. I don't think any of those are good explanations because, look, if not getting the answer to prayer is because God doesn't do miracles anymore, then what kind of God is he anyway? He's not God anymore? He changed his powers? It was like, oh, well, that's the alternate universe. In this universe, he doesn't have those. Kryptonite only works in this one, right? That doesn't make sense. And if it's not having enough faith, come on, man. I know some people who've gotten healed. I'm like, man, that guy has way more faith than her. Okay? How does that work out? And if God sends heartbreak to teach you a lesson, then why do the Cowboys have a losing record? What lesson is there to learn, Lord? I'm here. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. How do you reconcile this complicated idea? When you're here holding the check, how do you reconcile a God who can help a God who is good and wants good for you, and a God who chooses not to intervene and to allow the natural course of events. How do you reconcile that? How do you move forward in faith? I want to show you an example of some guys in the Bible who did just that, because I want to see what we can learn from them, because I've been in that crisis of belief, and maybe you have too. And if you haven't yet, you might, and you might need this idea. I want to talk to you about three guys, and if you grew up in church, you've probably heard of these guys before. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Not Abednego. I grew up in Missouri, Arkansas, Kentucky. Bendigo. Okay, and now I'm like the college educated. Oh, it's Abednego, right? Some of you guys know somebody who's always correcting you. Okay, but these three guys, all right, they're three Jewish men, and they are all courtesans. They're sort of in the nobility class in the Babylonian Empire. And let me give you the backstory before we jump into what the Bible records. So the king here is Nebuchadnezzar, and he, like many other people who get a little bit of authority, it goes to his head. He thinks he's a big deal. And he builds, okay, the Bible's not exaggerating here, a 90-foot tall statue of himself. And he says, all of the royals, okay, I'm going to have the whole royal band come, and they're going to play a tune for me, and everyone's going to bow down and worship this 90-foot tall statue of me. Compensating for something? Maybe. 90-foot tall statue of my greatness. Everybody bows down to worship this. And if you don't, I'm going to throw you into a furnace and watch you burn alive. Okay? That's the kind of person that was in charge of Babylon back in the day. And the Bible picks up this story in Daniel chapter 3. Okay, imagine these guys. Okay, they're Jews. They serve the Lord. Obviously, bowing down to a 90-foot tall idol, not okay. And they refuse. Sorry, man, but no, we're not going to do that. Verse 13, Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. And he says, I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I've made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. By the way, just time out. He must have really liked these guys to not go straight to furnace. He's like, oh, not those guys. I really like them. Maybe they misunderstood the assignment. Tell them again. He says, I'll give you one more chance. Bow down when you hear the music. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then, and I want you to look at this, because this matters more than you realize, then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Now you might think, okay, well, clearly this stuff has gone to his head. He thinks he's a God. But this sentence right here, okay, this sentence should have come with a trigger warning. Any of you guys ever see media and they're like, trigger warning? Right? If you've ever had, okay, this should have been a trigger warning, because I can tell you right now that absolutely brought some bad memories back to these young men. We don't know for sure how old they were in this passage. Who knows? Early 20s to mid 40s maybe. But we do know about something that happened when they were 12, 13, 14 years old. See, in case you don't know the whole story and you were wondering, why are Jews nobles in a Babylonian court, it's because they were prisoners of war. These three guys were living in Jerusalem and probably part of the nobility in the kingdom of Judah when Babylon decided to conquer the whole territory, including the capital of Jerusalem. They were young teens when Jerusalem, the capital city, came under siege. And if you know anything about ancient warfare and sieges, okay, it wasn't like they're throwing catapults and flaming stuff. If people just closed the doors and hid behind stone walls, you had two options. You could send all of your forces to try to climb the walls and take the city, or you could surround the city and keep them from getting out to the food supplies in the fields and just wait for them to starve and give up, or become so emaciated they can't fight back. And that's the approach that Babylon took when these boys, these three guys, were young again, somewhere between 12, 14, maybe 15 years old. And it was not a happy time. It was a difficult time. And these were God-fearing men, clearly. And so when you got the enemy army around you and you're God-fearing men, what do? You pray. God, you got to help. This is your capital. Your temple is here inside the city walls where your presence lies. Your credibility is on the line, Lord. You have to do something to help. And these same three guys in the same city would have remembered very well, because it was relatively recent history, that about 100 years before that siege, the Assyrian Empire had put a siege around Jerusalem. And the king of that time, a guy named Hezekiah, prayed earnestly, and God stepped in and did a miracle, wiped the army off the map. They left with their tail between their legs, and God came through miraculously and saved everyone. Okay, so I want you to understand, young teenage boys, they've grown up their whole life. When we are up against the wall, we pray, God answers. That's what they grew up with. So they come under siege. They're praying. Month 1 goes by. Food sources are getting a little lower. They're praying. Month 3, month 6, month 12, month 18, month 24. Okay? We're not sure if it's either 18 months or about 30 months. It's hard to know with certainty which year. Okay? But minimum of a year and a half, they're under siege and they're praying and God's not doing anything. And things are getting bad. Conditions are getting really bad. You may not realize this. The book of the Bible, Lamentations, is in large part a book of mourning about what happened when Jerusalem fell. And people who were there in the city wrote about the conditions. Here's what they said. Lamentations 4, starting at verse 4. Imagine this, okay? Turn the vibrancy up on your imagination for a minute. The parched tongues of their little ones stick to the roofs of their mouths in thirst. The children cry for bread, but no one has any to give them. The people who once ate the richest foods now beg in the streets for anything they can get. Those who once wore the finest clothes now search the garbage dumps for food. And I can tell you, these three young men were probably some of those families. They grew up the inner circle. They had a lot. They had a comfortable life until all of a sudden they really didn't. Verse 8, their faces are blacker than soot. No one recognizes them in the streets. Their skin sticks to their bones. It's as dry and hard as wood. Starving, they waste away from lack of food from the fields. Tender-hearted women have cooked their own children. They have eaten them to survive the siege. That's bad. When you say, I think we need war again, I don't think you want that. Imagine living in that. Imagine the stories that say every time we're up against the wall, we pray and God does a miracle. And imagine watching as these people, these good-hearted people that you've grown up with all of your lives are weeping and vomiting as they eat what's left of their children just to try to survive another day. And God is not answering. Yeah, trigger warning for sure for these guys when he says, what king? Okay, because Nebuchadnezzar is the guy doing the siege. And he says, hey, your God didn't save you before. What makes you think he's going to save you now? The nation of Judah did not surrender. They became so weak that the Babylonians tore the walls down. And if you're these three boys who survived, okay, you're hiding somewhere, shaking uncontrollably, hoping they don't find you as dad's getting stabbed and mom's getting raped and people are getting burned alive. Your house is getting burned down. And the one thing that you thought you could depend on, the temple where God's presence is getting stripped for parts and burned to the ground. The Holy of Holies where no one's allowed to go in, it's in flames. And you're carried away to go serve this foreign king who killed your family. And all of those memories come floating back when this guy says, what God is going to save you from my hand? Certainly not the one in your temple. We tried that before. You lost, remember? Do you want to bow or not? You want to talk about holding a bounce check? 100 years ago for my great-granddad, you saved us, and this time you let all of that happen to your people? Lord, how could you? Now, the Bible tells us God had been telling the nation for years and years, for generations, you've got to stop what you're doing or else I'm going to stop protecting you. You've got to change or else I'm going to let punishment happen. He was just in what he did. But that doesn't change the reality for these boys. Nebuchadnezzar says, what God can save you from my hand? I want you to let those words hang in the air for a minute before I tell you how they responded. Because I got to think that challenge, that crisis of faith is strong in their minds. And here's what they say. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But put that up. But look at this. Put that next slide up. Look at this. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Wait a minute. Even if he doesn't? Some of you grew up in a tradition like I did where that was what you said when you didn't have faith. There's no room for even if he doesn't, because he's going to. And any possibility that he isn't going to means, well, you don't believe hard enough. But these guys, they say, I believe he can, and I'm confident that he will. But there was that last statement in there that I believe only comes from someone who's held a bounce check before and said, but even if he doesn't, that doesn't change my loyalty to him. I'm still not going to turn my back on him. Even if having the ability to save me and being good, he allows me to burn to death in this furnace, I still won't turn my back on him because I'm loyal to him. I'm not loyal because he does stuff for me. I'm loyal because I serve him and he's good. And what you need to know about faith that can survive when things don't go your way, write this down, is that resilient faith is tied to a person and not an outcome. How can you do that? How can you watch everything that you love get burned to the ground and say, I still have faith in that God enough to die for him, even though he didn't come through for me the last time? You can only do that if your faith was never in the answer yes, and your faith was instead in the God who has been consistently good to you, and you believe has created the world around you, and you believe has called you to be one of his own. It only comes when your faith is planted in who he is and not what he can do for you. And that brings us back around to this key verse that we've been looking at the whole time. Hebrews 10:23. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, not because I know God's going to say yes. It's not, let me hold unswervingly. Oh, I'm trying to spill my drink. It's not, I'm holding on to the hope because I know he's going to do what I asked. So I'm holding on to the hope because of who he is, because he who promised is faithful. And that is difficult. That is complicated. That's messy. That's not an easy answer. Because it's not just theoretical in that moment. What if he doesn't do what I expect? What if he doesn't do what I ask? And man, can I tell you as we start to wrap this up, can I tell you, I have been in that situation. I've been around this church thing my whole life. Okay, when I was a kid, my younger brother was in the car with my mom. Dog ran out into the middle of the street. Mom swerved to miss the dog, but another car was coming. He ended up as a man. He was probably 2.5, 3. breaking his leg. And the doctor said, look, we're not sure he's ever going to be able to walk again because of where this break happened and where the leg is. We don't know. We're going to do our best, but you need to understand he may be physically disabled for the rest of his life. And we prayed hard. And they set the bone, and wouldn't you know it, it healed properly. He ended up playing football and being a track star in high school. And God came through and did a miracle. Okay, God still can heal. God still can do stuff. Fast forward several years later when I was in college. My uncle, who was an ordained minister, went to get a dental procedure done, said, man, I have a headache. My head just really hurts. Laid down on the bed and had a massive aneurysm in his early 40s. He's about my age. Took him to the hospital. They stabilized him, but they said, here's the deal. We don't know if he's ever going to wake up from this coma. And can I tell you, we prayed. Pastors all across the area prayed. Everybody I knew in my college prayed. My dad and my mom, both licensed ministers. My grandfather, who'd been ordained for his whole... Okay, we prayed hard. We prayed every faith prayer you could think. We used all the right language. There was no doubt that he was going to raise him up. And for a year and a half, we prayed. And he died. So when I'm telling you that sometimes you're left with the bounce check and you have to keep moving forward, it's not just theory. I've seen it. I've lived it. I know what a gut check that is when you say, God, you could have done something. I know it. And I don't understand why you didn't this time. And now I'm in a position where people are asking me to pray for them to be healed. How do you reconcile that? Only if your faith is in God and not in the outcome, because He's still in charge. And if He only answers based on what I want, He's not sovereign. If it's a God that I can fully understand, why should I put my faith in someone who I can fully wrap my mind around? It's hard. And if you've been in that spot, there's this tendency to say, well, I don't want to pray for them. What if he says no? Yeah, but what if he says yes? I still believe he can. I still believe he does. And the last thing for you to write down, the last thing in this series for you to write down is that when checks bounce, don't stop writing. Don't stop praying. Don't say, well, I guess he's just not in the miracle business anymore, because he is. And don't say to somebody, well, I guess you just didn't have enough faith. That's why mom died. No, it's not. He's allowed to answer however he wants. Sometimes we don't understand. Many of you guys know and love Patty Boyd deeply. And when Patty got the report of cancer, she was in the hospital. I went and spent time with her and the family. And I said, Patty, we are praying. God's going to heal you. And Patty said, Pastor, I appreciate that, and I believe that He can. But if this is my time to go, I want you to know I am at peace. And if this is time for me to go to heaven, I receive that. Can I tell you, that takes some maturity. That is not an easy balance. But that's the kind of faith that says God can and He will. And even if He doesn't, I will still trust Him. I'm still invested in Him. I will never turn my back on Him because He doesn't do what I ask Him to do the way I expect Him to do it. That is the kind of faith that you need when you are facing that challenge. When your husband or your business or the people that are closest to you are going through that. Don't give up on faith because the answer was no. We're still going to pray. We're still going to ask, but we're going to invest our faith in the God who is faithful. to his word. And that's how you move forward when the checks bounce.
Hey there, just wanted to take a minute to say thanks for watching. If a friend sent you this link, it's because they believe what we talked about today is going to make a positive impact in your life. And if it did, there's probably somebody that you care about who could benefit from it. So take a minute to share this video with somebody. Post it to your timeline or send them a direct link. And if you're able, take a minute to give using the link at the bottom of the description on this video. One last thing. Maybe you feel a tug at your soul and you're ready to take the next step in your spiritual life and form a relationship with God. We've got folks here who would love to talk with you about it. So just text prayer to the number on your screen and we'll follow up with you. It's also in the description on this video in case that helps. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.